Lord God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here today. Hear your word, open our eyes and ears and hearts and minds so that we may understand what you plan to teach us today. We ask this in your name. Amen. All right. For the people who weren't here last week, a quick review, now that I've got this to work. The book of Esther is located between Nehemiah and Job. That's because they haven't figured out yet whether this is a historical account or whether it's an account that just explains what was going on at the time. Today we might call it a satire or a fiction novel based on fact or whatever. No one seems to know. It's often called the scroll. It's one of 5 full scrolls. So it was well known. 480 BC, I don't know if any of you were around then, but that's 480 years before the birth of Christ. The Persians conquered the Babylonians. That's in the book of Daniel. And the Jews were allowed to return home, but some stuck around, and that's what we're dealing with here. And the book was written very close to whenever these events supposedly occurred. Okay? That's the key. So here are the key players. I was going to ask you who the key players are, but you know, Esther is the Jewish version living in Persia. Mordecai is Esther's guardian since her parents had both died. Now, according to some, as we learned last week, according to some commentaries, Mordecai might have been her uncle. King Xerxes, that's how you pronounce it, is the ruler of Persia. Haman is the most trusted advisor. And Queen Vashti, we had a lot of fun with Queen Vashti. So from those of you who were here last week, what happened to Queen Vashti?
Kicked her out.
Yeah, she got kicked out. Why did she get kicked out?
She defied him.
Defied? What did he ask her to do?
Just to come to his king.
Dressed how? Just wearing a crown and nothing else. And she didn't want to do that.
She's just having her birthday soon.
Yeah, so she got kicked out. And that's where this story begins. Now the king has no queen, so he is searching for one. And he has, so fill our friends in as to how they determined that Esther should be the queen. What exactly did she have to go through?
Her beauty.
Yeah, but how did they figure it out? How many months of what?
Lots of treatments, beauty treatments and stuff.
Yeah. They had at least 12 months of beauty treatments and training.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and she wasn't the only one. There were other ones, but apparently, why did they figure she was so special? Who figured it out?
Xerxes, eunuch that was in
Yeah, the eunuch.
Yeah.
harem.
Yeah, the eunuch. Remember, my father used to say a eunuch is a saved date. So basically, the eunuch is the one who says to the king, so she had to step up on the rest of them, and eventually, she is the one that is chosen. Now, who did Queen Esther tell that she was Jewish?
Mordecai knows.
Yeah.
He knows, right?
Yeah, but he's family. Who else did she tell? The answer is nobody.
I was going to say, I don't think she told anybody because that would be a...
So no one knows. She's now the queen. She's Jewish. She has done nothing, and Leona asked this, she has done nothing to let anyone know that she is Jewish at this point. I read some commentaries, and they're not quite sure exactly what that means, whether she remained faithful to the faith on the sly or what she did, but she did not tell anybody anything. So the king doesn't know, and the court doesn't know. Which brings us to our first, our theme for today, because remember, this Haman dude, he's an Amalekite who can't stand Jewish people. You ask why the Jews are so hated. This goes all the way back to the Promised Land, okay? he hates Jewish people. And we're going to find that there is an incident that causes everything in this book to be focused differently. Now, one other thing you need to know, there was all these references to all of the, the king would send out hundreds of couriers with his law and everything. This is all the territory going down and around down this way. This is, see where my finger is?
Mhm.
That's where these Jews were, right there. That over there is the promised land. That shows you how far away those people were taken. So you get somebody, and his empire covered all of this, plus all the way around this way into North Africa.
Where's the promised land?
Right over here.
Oh, okay.
So there's Jerusalem right there. So you can see how big this was. So anytime the king had to pass a law, he couldn't get on the phone or send Western Union. He had to send all these people out with all kinds of instructions written in several languages. We mentioned that last week, that any time the king would come up with a decree, it would take forever. Well, that's why it takes forever, because of all, that's the land that these people, controlled. So those lines that are on there were how the Jewish people came this way and how most of them went back the other way. But as you can see, way over here, that's where these Jews chose to stay. So Mordecai and Esther and a few others are living over here. They chose not to move. Maybe it's because they intermarried, I don't know, but they're still there. So that's the whole story behind what's going on. Now, Haman, this guy who hates Jews, comes up with an excuse to come up with a plan to vent his hatred. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I mean, we talked about the sex last week, so I told you there'd be intrigue. There is the intrigue this week. So, who would like to read Esther 2:21 to 23?
Esther 2:21 through 23.
Right.
Let me see if I can find this. Okay. All right. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bathana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king.
Now, that's her version of that. No, there's already an issue here. You heard how Renee said they met their end. Would somebody like to read verse 23 from your Bible?
And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on the gallows.
There's a big difference between impaled and hanged. You know the difference, right? Apparently, either way, these two guys met their end. And Mordecai was the one that was involved.
Snitch.
So he's got a little bit of leverage in his back pocket. That's an important part of the story as it goes from here. He's got leverage in his back pocket. And so he is also known to the king. Who did it? Well, that Mordecai guy. Who's he? He's the one that remember last week we kept talking about how he kept showing up every day?
Mm.
Well, the reason, so why would he have been at the king's gate to hear all this? We studied this last week. Why did we learn last week? Because he was there. Why?
He's always talking to Esther.
Right, he was making sure his family member was being,
Yeah, he's always talking to her.
it was being taken care of and everything else, and he was kind of like, for lack of a better term, the mother hen.
Yeah.
So he was just there when this occurred. And I don't think he was in it for the glory, I just think he felt he was doing the right thing. So now it gets to be fun. So would somebody like to read the first verse of chapter 3?
After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of
Hammedatha.
the Arrogate, elevated him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles.
Okay, so Haman is like, the term that they like to use is Grand Vizier, or the Prime Minister, or whatever term you like. He's like the right hand of the king now. He's the boss. He's in charge of everything.
So he was just some of the king's people, but he was promoted or whatever.
Right, he was promoted,
It's
so.
not mentioned until chapter 3, so you're like, okay.
Yeah, so basically he was, I don't know what he was before this, but he gets promoted to this position, which means he's in charge of everything, including the king's seal. Back in those days, the kings just didn't sign stuff. They had the seal that they would use. I don't know if they used wax in those days or not. It could have been anything, but basically that was the idea. Any of you ever see the original Prince and the Pauper?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably, but-
Yeah, that's I think is the one Errol Flynn was in, and they could, they're trying to prove to everybody that they've changed places, and so then they said, well, which one of you has the king's seal? And the pauper says, you mean that big round thing that has the, that pattern on it? Yeah, that thing. He says, I didn't know that's what it was. He says, I've been using it to crush walnuts. So anyway, but that was kind of serious in those days, that you had that ability, because in theory, you could forge the king's signature and put a seal on it and send it out, and nobody would be the wiser. But anyway, so now Haman is now the boss. So an event occurs that makes Haman very, very, very angry. Would somebody like to read verses, chapter 3, verses 2 to 6?
All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes.
Question,
Mm-hmm.
what, Mordecai told Haman that,
Why would he tell him?
that he was a Jew?
No, he's told somebody else who told Haman that he was a Jew. It doesn't say who. It says, for he had told them he was a Jew. So basically, he's saying that I'm Jewish, I don't do this sort of thing, we don't bow to human beings and all that kind of stuff. You keep asking the question, Dave, why are the Jews so hated? Well, here's one reason. It starts way back here. And as I told you, Haman was an Amalekite who hated the Jews anyway. And now here was an excuse. And notice what he says. He says, I'm not going to vent my anger against you. I'm going to vent anger of all of you. And you have given me the excuse for doing that. And you say, well, that's a nasty approach. Wasn't that how World War I started? A Serbian national by the name of Galvero Princip shot a low-level archduke in what was now, it is now Sarajevo. And so the Austro-Hungarians decided to take it out on all Serbians, not just that guy. And as a result, World War I began. And look at Adolf Hitler's feeling toward the Jews. He wasn't going to just get the ones he knew. He might as well get them all while they're getting
But
school.
wasn't he Jewish too?
Partially.
Half Jewish.
Partially. So basically, you know, this has been going on throughout history. One person does something, and then the entire race. Look what's going on in Gaza right now.
And they said that in here that they would bow down to kings, no problem, but the Israelites and Amalekites didn't get along, so he didn't want to bow to an Amalekite. It wasn't
Right.
any other reason.
So anyway, so here you had an issue way over here that started way over there.
I have a question.
Hmm.
Are all people, so to speak, original origin Jewish? Meaning like,
Boy.
you know what I mean? Like say there was a legitimate child and a child from a second wife, or you know, but that the child was still part Jewish and they went off and, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the way Adolf Hitler looked at it. That was definitely the case. If you had any Jewish blood in you at all, you were Jewish. Didn't matter how far back it went. And
I mean, everybody's related that way, so why do they hate each other? They're all
well,
related.
there are certain inconsistencies about that. For example, one of the things that my brother Earl, who's since passed away, used to argue with me about all the time was, remember when Cain killed Abel?
Yeah.
The Bible says Cain went to the land of Nod, where he got married.
Yeah, but how could you get married? There wasn't anybody around. See, I never understand that whole thing.
Exactly.
There's nobody around, you know.
Also,
A lot of incest.
Yeah, well, it was allowed then.
well, no, what I'm saying is that,
There's only supposed to be Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. There's not supposed to be anybody else. So how did?
well, that's
Well,
the
they had-
point.
Yeah, they had to, there had to be somebody.
That's right, that's the point, you see. So it turns out that there were, the beliefs are that Lot's sons and Jacob's sons, some of them went off and started whole new races. The Moabites were not Jewish, but that was from Lot's, his incestuous relationship with his daughter or granddaughter, one of the two. And Ishmael's, remember the Jacob-Ishmael story where they tricked, Ishmael should have had the birthright, and they tricked
Esau.
Rather, and so then that branch of the family took off, and they became Muslims, supposedly. So yeah, everybody's kind of related, but there are explanations for everybody who's not Jewish in the Bible if you look deep enough. They all relate to somebody. In fact, in the movie, the Ten Commandments, when Moses, played by Charlton Heston, meets up with Jethro, and he says, "You believe in the Jewish father Abraham?" And the answer was, Abraham was the father to many nations. He is also mentioned in the Quran as being the father of the Muslim nation as well. So there are others out there. It's just that the Bible doesn't talk about them much, but it mentions them. And
And also they say that the Bible was written in different ways. Part of the Bible was written allegory, another part was written to be totally true, and another part was written this way. The Bible wasn't written to be totally, literally believed.
Yeah, that sensible people believe that, but we have had cases where, in Bible studies I've been involved in, where that was not looked at very kindly. For example, the book of Jonah. Some believe that the book of Jonah was really a satire. That proved that God cares for everybody on earth. But there are people who honestly believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that there was a Jonah, and every event in there is absolutely 100% true. Also, the other problem with it is most of the Bible was recorded orally. Have you ever seen the second part of Roots? When he's in the village, and they had one person whose job it was to have memorized all of the history of the clan going back 1,000 years. And you had to sit and listen to him. You couldn't interrupt him, because if you interrupted him, you had to start over. So he just kept going and going and going. And when you finally heard the name you wanted to hear, then you would tell him to slow down. And that's supposedly how Alex Haley figured out that village is where his family came from. But whenever you deal with oral stuff, every once in a while...
I was going to say, though, the thing is, 10 people can see the same thing, but they see it differently.
Well, have any of you ever done the wash the elephant exercise?
Is it the one you go out of the room and you tell a story or something?
No. What happens is you go out of the room, and there's one person in there, and he's handed a piece of paper that says, "You are to demonstrate washing an elephant." That's all that's said. Everything else is silent. Then they bring another person in. So this first person is doing this, and by the time you get to the 8th person, as you pass it along, and you ask, "What are you doing?" "Oh, you're washing a skyscraper." Whereas the first guy had the trunk, and he had the tail, and he was underneath, and had the legs.
Yeah, well, I've been to the classes where you have to, you send somebody out of the room and they say something, and then by the time the whole thing is done, the story is completely different, believe me, it's nothing like the beginning of the story.
Could we, sometime do a Bible study on just Adam and Eve?
Oh yeah, we could. I'd be happy to.
And, on whether or not they were a nation.
Right, exactly.
Oh, you mean instead of just 2 people?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what you said, okay.
We can do that. That's in my. I'd love to do that, because it turns out there's a whole lot of other stuff in there that's kind of neat. But also, any of you ever see the movie Sergeant York, where Gary Cooper plays Sergeant York?
Years ago, yeah.
When they're walking through the mud, and the guy named York, what did he do? He brought it. By the time it gets to the end of the line, what did this guy named York do? I don't know. It's something about shooting the Kaiser. But anyway, getting back to it. So now Haman is upset, and he is, he's got a reason now. He's got that smoking gun. He's going to stick it to all these people that he's been wanting to get at for years. Would somebody like to, we'll split this up into 2 eventually. So why doesn't somebody please read Esther chapter 3, verse 7 to the end of the chapter?
I'll do that. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, they cast the pur, that is the lot, in the presence of Haman to select the day.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Okay.
And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay, what they're doing is he's going to kill all the Jews, so they're gambling to find out what day they want to do it. Okay, go ahead.
Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There are certain people dispersed and scattered among peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all the other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this business. So the king took the signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in a script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders and the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day. The 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Copy of the text of the edict would be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so they'd be ready for that day. Spurred on by king's command, the couriers went out, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered.
Okay, remember, Susa is here. So he's sending people to all over this area. So we're not talking about a local thing. We're talking about, you know, the final solution here. And that's why he has to have all of those couriers and all those languages and all that other stuff, because he's got to translate it for all these people. And no, so what was the king's attitude towards this whole thing?
Okay, do what you want.
Yeah,
Whatever you like. It's okay.
whatever you like sounds good to me. You know, it sounds good to you, it sounds good to me. I'm too busy, like we learned last week, drinking and carrying on and having banquets and stuff. I can't be worried about such things. By the way, according to the book that I have, this is an actual commentary. The 10,000 talents. There's copies of these in the church office if anybody wants to read them. The commentary on Esther says that 10,000 talents in today's money, or the day at the time this book was written, it's old. I mean, after all, we spent a lot of money for it. How much did you pay for it at the Bibles? I mean, at the library sale, $10 for the whole set or something.
I don't remember.
There's 14.
It's been a while.
There's 14 volumes of this. We got it for $10. Obviously, there's not much of a market for Bible commentaries in these.
In the library.
So anyway, it said, I think it said, I'll find it eventually, but I think it said something to the effect that it was $11 million plus.
Wow.
So now who's got the money? He's got the money. And he says, whatever you want to do with it, go ahead. You know, he could have pocketed the money himself. He could have done whatever he did. It doesn't really say what he did with it. So the
Went outside and bought camels
Yeah.
and dogs and stuff.
That was supposed to
Elephants.
be per person, you know, when you say it's per person.
yeah. So first of all, this is where we run into the word per, P-U-R. It's a non-Hebraic word explained by the Hebrew, which is called lot. So they're drawing lots. He goes on to say that, you know, the money is given to you. Does the author intend to say that the king refused this handsome bribe as a grandiose gesture of his immense royal wealth? Or is this the example of Oriental court politeness, which implies the king really expected that it would seem good to Haman to pay the money? The later interpretations probably represent the intentions of the author, for according to 4:7, Mordecai's information indicates that acceptance of the bribe was part of the deal. So basically, he's sending these couriers out, and then it says, under verse 15, the king and Haman sat down to drink. An effective piece of literary contrast. It said it's no different than Nero fiddling while Rome burned. So the king is, oh, well, whatever, you did that? Okay, great, wonderful. So as far as he's concerned, what's the big deal? Well, he doesn't know his wife is Jewish.
I was gonna say, you still don't know she's Jewish.
He doesn't know she's Jewish. Now this is very important for the rest of the story. That's where the suspense comes in. The soap opera suspense, as it turns out. Now, would somebody like to read the first 7 verses of chapter 4?
7? Okay, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned, what's his name?
Haddock.
One of the king's eunuchs, assigned to her attender, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Haddock went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews.
So, we keep reading about people tearing their clothes in the Bible. It's very common. What exactly does that mean?
There's a bunch of naked people running around. Oh, no.
No. It has an exact meaning.
They're grieving, they're mourning,
Yeah, well, it's also the last brave act of defiance. Okay? When you tear your clothes, that's and then you have to wear sackcloth. And I don't know about you, but sackcloth doesn't sound all that pleasing.
a burlap bag.
Yeah, that's about what it is, and also with ashes. So in other words, they're saying that that's what's going to happen to them. They're going to turn into something that looks like that. All right.
And what do they mean by paying into the treasury?
Well, remember, Haman was going to give the money to the treasury to pay for all this, and the king says, "Nah, you keep it." So, in other words, this was going to be like the Magnificent Seven, where you start paying mercenaries to go out and do something. But the king said, "No, you don't need to do that. Keep it yourself. Do whatever you want with it." So the king has no clue what's going on. Esther has now figured it out. Okay, she's on the inside. He's on the outside. Now, notice it said through all the area. So this was not going to be a local thing like, when Herod killed all the babies in Bethlehem. This is going to be like all the way over here, kind of deal. And not only that, they're going to pay people to do it. Think about that. They're going to pay people to do it. And, I don't know about you, but I don't know how much wages were in those days, but if you make money doing what the king says to do, I guess that's okay. So now, and notice it says, Esther was troubled. Yeah, I would imagine that would make her troubled. And it goes on, the commentaries go into even more detail. But the key thing you have to know, like I said, Dave, you keep asking why the Jews are so hated. Well, here's another reason. Apparently there were no shortage of people that were willing to step up and make the king's order work. Not only here, but way over there and anywhere in between. So, also in those days, how shall I put this? Once a law was in place, it could not be reprimanded. it's now the law. And there's nothing that anybody, they think there's nothing that anybody can do about it.
So when they made a law, they couldn't change it?
That's right. It was the king's edict. Yeah, there was a crazy movie called Bananas with Woody Allen in it, where he's down in the Southern Republic. That got taken over by another dictator, and he had an edict that went out that all men will change their underwear 3 times per day, and the way I'll check is you'll all wear it on the outside so I can see it. So anyway, so there's more to it than that. So Mordecai could resume his accustomed place in the city gate if he did. He changed his clothes. So Esther sends him a set of clothes. Okay. And then what does he do? He doesn't want them. He wants everybody to see who he is and what's about to happen to him and all. So, it says, according to this, so Mordecai could resume his accustomed place in the city gate. According to Talmudic Judaism, one should not make a public show of his personal bereavement and thus inflict his sufferings upon others. Mordecai's refusal to accept the closing was evidence to Esther that his actions were caused not by a personal sorrow, but by an unusually dire calamity. That was his message to her. This isn't just me, it's a whole lot of other people than me. In further answer to Dave's question about the money, it says, verse 7, the exact sum of money, a reference to Haman's bribe. The illusion loses its point if 3:11 does not imply the king intended to accept the money. Of course, it might be assumed that Mordecai was misinformed. However, since it's repeatedly implied that he had access to inside sources of information, the most natural interpretation of the acceptance of blood money was part of the transaction. So that's what that was about. So basically, you've got this whole scenario about to play out. Haman knows about it. Esther doesn't know about it. So keep that in mind as the story moves forward. Here's Esther on the inside. She's supposed to be as well connected to the king as Haman is, right? You would think. Is that really true?
Well, you said that the women and men are separated, so that doesn't mean he told her anything.
Exactly. The women and the men were separated. And she only got to go when he summoned her. So it is likely, very likely, that she has absolutely no idea what's going on with this thing. I mean, look at the, ever see the movie Robin Hood?
Mm-hmm.
Remember, Maid Marian had separate quarters. She had her own handmaid. Oh, I forget what her name was, the older woman, but she wasn't allowed to leave. I mean, that's the way it was in those days. The women were to be like children. They were to be seen and not heard, and they were not to hear anything. So the reason I bring this up is because the rest of the story hinges on it. The rest of the story, I want you to think about, is how Mordecai's doing all this on the outside. She's on the inside wondering what's going on, how the two of them would connect. If you were in that situation, what would you do? Think about that for next week. Also, as I said, Dave, this is not the first time that somebody's tried to wipe out the Jews, but this is the first time it's actually been written. So you can see, now the Amalekites, as I said, they're from way over there. They were one of the groups that got kicked out when Joshua took over the Promised Land, and they never forgot Now, how he ended up way over here, I don't know. Business arrangements, who knows? And why an Amalekite would be in the king's court at all, that's also unknown. You would think, well, wait a minute, he's in Persia, he's got all these Persians running around. Why in the heck have I got an Amalekite that's my number 2 man? That doesn't make any sense. Well, when you think about it though, it makes a good story. So keep that in mind. Also, I want you to keep thinking about, we just read a whole bunch more, and there was a word that should have been mentioned, hasn't been mentioned yet. And at the end of this, I'm going to ask you what it is.